At a dinner for my mother-in-law's birthday, in a posh restaurant on Via Vittorio Veneto, with windows overlooking the twinkling lights of springtime Rome, there was no place for me, no chair, no cutlery, not even a tiny, symbolic glass to indicate that I was part of this scene, included in this carefully constructed, elegant tableau of a bourgeois family celebration, behind every element of which, ironically, in another life I myself might have stood. My husband, David, chuckled, briefly, lazily, with that casual mockery he seemed to save for moments when he wanted to discount a situation without delving into its essence. "Oh, perhaps we didn't count," he said, and there was a general, almost relieved laughter around the table, as if his remark had dispelled an invisible tension, signaling that everything was fine, and that the obvious could be overlooked. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy. The family laughed. Someone leaned back, someone took a sip of wine, and someone, I remember especially, glanced towards the waiter, as if to ask if they would bring an extra chair, or if they would bring anything extra. I, keeping calm, said, "It seems that I am not from the family." These words were not dramatic, they were not a reproach. I said them evenly, restrainedly, as a statement of fact, as if I had mentioned that evening had come or that it had started to rain. Then I stood up, slowly, without attracting undue attention, and left, feeling the gazes on me, some astonished, others indifferent, and some, and this was almost physically tangible, with a shade of relieved gloating, as if deep down someone had long been waiting for me to take this step away myself. 30 minutes later, when my absence had finally become apparent to the table, amid the wine and hors d'oeuvres, I had cancelled the entire event. Everything, the dinner, the flowers, the music, the staff, the dessert delivery, the surprise show that was to begin in 15 minutes. I had organized it all myself, from the vintage vases of white peonies hand-picked from the outskirts of Tivoli to the four-course menu approved by the chef in advance. Their faces turned ghostly white as they took in the enormity of it, not just the cancellation, but my role in it. "I don't think I'm part of the family," I said again, but this time in my own voice, firm and clear despite the earthquake going on in my chest. The words hung in the air of that exclusive Roman restaurant, where every movement of the waiter and every rustle of the dishes was calculated to aesthetic perfection, and 12 pairs of eyes, including those of my mother-in-law, Davide's sisters, and his brother, stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to poorly concealed satisfaction, as if at that moment I had fulfilled someone's long-held inner fantasy. The light chuckle of my husband Davide, when he said, "Oh, I guess we didn't count," still rang in my ears, like an echo in the empty hall, as I turned and walked away from the table where there was no chair for me. Humiliation, cold and burning, coursed through my veins, but the tears did not come. Instead, an eerie, icy calm came, as if my body and mind had decided that crying was a luxury unacceptable in the moment of action. I pulled out my phone and opened the event management app, the same digital console that controlled every detail, every candle, every cord, from New York to Geneva. I had 30 minutes before they realized what I was doing, and that was more than enough. Here we go. I hit stop on the dinner schedule, turned off the catering team, rerouted supplies, and sent out notifications to contractors. Still with the same expressionless face, but with an inner fire. I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this incredible journey. Sometimes the most powerful moments come not when we are applauded, but when we finally realize our worth, the one that was forgotten in the noise of others' expectations. If you have ever felt like a bystander in this story, perhaps you can relate to this. My name is Anna Conti. 5 years ago, I was just Anna Conti, a bride, a businesswoman, a dreamer. Founder of Elite Affairs, Boston's most sought-after event planning company. I built my career from nothing, with an MBA, a laptop, and an ambition that was often ridiculed but never stopped. Every elegant gala, every corporate event, every wedding at a historic estate, it all bore my invisible fingerprints. My reputation for making the impossible happen attracted clients whose names mattered as much as their budgets. That's how I met David Mancini, at a benefit I was organizing for Boston Children's Hospital, an event where opulence was not obtrusive, and every element, from the shimmering crystal chandeliers to the orchids in glass vases, was carefully chosen by me to make donors feel part of something bigger than just a celebration. He was tall, with perfectly groomed dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead, and that dazzling smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle in a charming way, giving his face a touch of humanity that contrasted with the bearing and manner of a self-assured heir to an old fortune. David had the ease and equanimity of a man who never worried about bills, who had learned from his youth that doors would open on their own, not with an effort, but with the very fact of his appearance. But for all his innate serenity, his interest in my work was not casual or superficial, as so many of his circle did, but surprisingly alive, with a touch of genuine admiration. "Are you the wizard behind all this?" he asked, gesturing toward the transformed ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel, where the evening was unfolding with the precision of a Swiss clock, and there was not condescension in his tone but an almost childlike wonder. My mother was trying to figure out who to hire for her charity event next month. "I think I just found her answer," he added, and from that evening on, everything spun like one of those movies I used to watch alone in the evening, walking home from hours of assembling wedding pavilions on Cape Cod. One job led to another, each event cementing my position as the organizer for the Mancini family, the Mancinis who had long been synonymous with Boston's aristocratic elite, a name burdened with pedigree and cemented by money that had come from the depths of the 19th century, from shipping, from railroads, from industries where wealth was hard-won but lasted forever. They had that rare kind of wealth that needed no display. It showed up not in logos and ostentatious luxury but in the impeccable tailoring of their suits, the silent confidence of their gestures, the antiques they used every day as if they had been bought at the corner store. The ease with which they navigated their world initially struck me as graceful, almost charming, until I realized that that ease existed because no one had ever questioned their right to be the center of any stage. My affair with David began 6 months after I started working for his family. He courted me with the same determination with which he approached negotiations at the family investment company, quietly, but consistently, persistently, with an ability to choose the moment and surprise on the most ordinary evening. Of course, there were warning signs that I did not want to notice at the time. The way his mother, Francesca, looked at me with barely concealed disapproval when we first met, accurately assessing my outfit, my manner of speech, my accent, my experience, which she considered something mundane. How she allowed herself to casually comment on my low-key background and typical American persistence, not forgetting to use my contacts and skills to organize her events. How people, upon learning that I was dating Mancini, spoke with surprise, sometimes with amazement, and sometimes with open doubt, as if I had accomplished the impossible. "You succeeded," Francesca said during our first dinner together as a couple, her smile as elegant as it was cold. It didn't reach her eyes. "Self-made success is so American," she added, taking a sip of white wine, her voice somewhere between irony and weariness, as if she were accepting my presence as temporary, fashionable, and ultimately replaceable. I ignored these signals because I had fallen in love with David, genuinely, truly, as a woman who wanted to believe that things would be different with him, that his care, his attention, and, yes, his warmth were not an act. He seemed different, softer, warmer, as if he didn't quite fit the rigidity of his environment. He wasn't fixated on lineage and status, at least not then. When he proposed 11 months after our first date, I said yes without hesitation, even though deep down I already felt a dull, heavy premonition that I was standing on the threshold of a world that I would never truly be allowed into, no matter how hard I tried. The wedding was the highlight of the season. Glossy magazines raved, bloggers posted photos with hashtags, the press admired the style. I, of course, planned it myself, not trusting any agency with what was supposed to be not just a day, but a symbol of my triumph. Francesca interfered with every element. The location, which I had chosen for its light and architecture, she considered too modern, the menu, adventurous, the guests, inappropriate. I compromised where I could, and David tried to mediate, but each time his voice sounded softer when it came to his mother, and harsher when it came to me. Immediately after the wedding, it became systematic. My decisions were cut, my proposals were questioned, ideas expressed by me were attributed to others. They still used my company, for parties, for galas, for social gatherings, but they did it as if they were hiring someone external, temporary, someone who, though useful, would never be part of their circle. My experience was now called a skill, my career a charming hobby. "Anna has such a good eye for these things," Francesca would tell her friends, patting my hand as if I were a pet, and adding, "It's almost like having a personal party planner for the family." Davide didn't defend me. He would shrug, say that it was just his mother, and that I shouldn't take her words to heart, but it was all personal. It got worse with each passing year. I saw the opportunity to organize Francesca's 70th birthday in Rome not only as a chance to prove myself, but also as the final argument, proof that I was not just a wife, not just an addition, but an equal part of this family. This was to be my crowning achievement, a week-long celebration in the Eternal City, culminating in a dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant overlooking the Colosseum. I dedicated myself entirely to creating the perfect event, investing not only my professional knowledge and experience, but also that subtle, almost intuitive passion for detail that made each of my projects a reflection of who I was, not just an organizer, but an architect of experiences, a conductor of emotions, a master of discreet perfection. I used all my contacts in the industry, from the sommelier from Tuscany who selected an exclusive wine for the dinner, to the florists from Paris who delivered live peonies at night across the border, everything so that Francesca's celebration would become an event that would be talked about with delight and admiration, an event after which no one would dare to doubt my belonging to this family. It was during the preparations, when the days flowed in a crazy rhythm of calls, meetings, approvals, and I felt how sleep was leaving, but drive was coming, how the realization that I could handle it came. It was then that I noticed the first cracks in the Mancini facade, cracks that at first seemed no more than roughness on a smooth surface. Deposits for venues began to be delayed, first by a day, then by 3, then by a week. Suppliers with whom I had worked for years began to call and write to me directly, asking when the promised funds would arrive. Some, tired of the uncertainty, began to hint that they could not guarantee their services without prepayment. When I shared my worries with David, he, with his characteristic disdain for details that do not concern him personally, waved it off and said that our family accountant was too cautious with international transfers. Like Italy, Europe, banks, all this always takes a long time. But on the third evening, when I walked into his office to check the menu and saw his laptop open, I glanced at the screen, and in that one glance, everything changed. The statements were there, lines of numbers against the white of a browser window, lines that spoke without emotion but unmistakably. The investments had failed, the properties were mortgaged to the last dollar, the credit lines were exhausted, the Mancini family fortunes were rapidly and irreversibly collapsing. Still, I kept planning, stubbornly, without giving in, covering the drawdowns with my own money, using my company's line of credit to pay for what I needed, telling myself that it was temporary, that things would get better, that after the celebration David would explain everything to me, and maybe he was already looking for a way out. Then came the morning of our flight to Rome. David was in the shower, the water rushing behind the closed door, when his phone vibrated on the nightstand. I had never looked at his phone, not because I didn't want to but because we had agreed to trust, but at that moment, some intuitive anxiety made me pick it up. A message flashed on the screen: "I can't wait to see you in Rome. Have you told her yet?" The text from V, laconic but full of anticipation. My fingers, as if moved by someone else, unlocked the screen and I saw a name: Teresa Ferretti. His college girlfriend. The woman whose name I heard mentioned at family dinners in ironic, condescending tones. The woman his parents had always adored, and for whom I now realized they still held out hope despite my presence. The messages had been going on for months, messages full of hints, confidences, plans, futures. They discussed their baby. The baby that was due in 4 months. I took screenshots, forwarded them to myself, deleted the entire conversation from my phone, closed the screen, took a deep breath, and packed my things. I put on my face, flawless, confident, professional. I smiled at the airport, laughed on board, chose wines from the business class menu, while everything inside me rumbled and crumbled, like an ancient building eroded by time and betrayal. And then we arrived. Fusain Airport greeted us with warm Roman air and a golden sunset spreading across the horizon, as if the city itself had decided to play a role in my production. I had arranged private transportation for Mancini's entire entourage, not just any cars, but a cortege of sleek, black Mercedes, with gloved drivers and air-conditioned cars smelling of the fresh leather of their seats. Francesca was the first to step down, dressed in silk, her gaze sliding over the cars as if she were looking at another bad choice. "I thought I said hotel cars, Anna." "They seem rather generic," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. I bit my tongue, not for the first time, and it seemed likely not to be the last. "The hotel is having scheduling problems. This is Lux Transport, They serve diplomats and delegations in Rome, I explained, but she had already turned to Jacob, and their heads were bowed together in a familiar conspiratorial gesture that left me outside their world. The Hotel de Russie, a jewel in the heart of Rome, welcomed us as I had planned: champagne in the private lounge, baskets of cheeses, figs, and truffles, bellhops carrying away suitcases, crisp white robes, personalized notes in the rooms. I had spent months choosing every element: suites with the best views of Piazza del Popolo, baskets filled with local delicacies, personalized itineraries of excursions, visits, tastings, tailored to the interests of each family member. Francesca barely glanced at her itinerary before casually tossing it on the table. "We'll just play with the circumstances," she said, waving her hand, as if she were looking at a candy wrapper rather than the result of months of painstaking work. The family knows Rome quite well. Our suite was magnificent, spacious, discreetly luxurious rooms, full of soft light, with a terrace overlooking the Spanish Steps, where tourists, as if at the behest of an invisible director, rushed and froze to the rhythm of the city, and the air was filled with the scent of jasmine mixed with the smoke of evening coffee. In each room there were vases of fresh flowers, chosen to my order from the morning market in Campo de' Fiori, and on the sideboard, covered in a light film of time's dust, there was a half-open bottle of Barolo, our favorite variety, brought from the Lang vineyards, and the one I remembered we had first opened after signing the contract for my first big event for Mancini. But as we entered, and before I had even taken off my shoes, Davide's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, quietly said, "Work," and, without waiting for an answer, went out onto the terrace, from where his muffled voice came in frozen words. I asked him when he came back what it was. "Just some investment questions," he answered briefly, without meeting my eyes, adding, a little more animatedly, as if returning to the role, "Let's get ready for dinner." The welcome dinner I had planned at a charming trattoria in the Trastevere district, with mosaic tables, festooned lamps, and live music from old Roman musicians, was supposed to be the beginning of our journey, the starting point for a week of celebration. But it was the first clear sign that I had been excluded. Somehow, despite my careful preparations and personally agreed-upon seating arrangements, everything had changed just before we arrived, and I found myself at the far end of the table, separated from David by his distant cousin, an annoyingly talkative lawyer, and an aunt whose questions were limited to the table setting. As jokes flew around the center of the table, and conversations were made about the family's previous Italian vacations, each mention of which emphasized my absence, I made several attempts to engage in conversation about the week's events, only to be abruptly and drily interrupted by Aurora, David's sister. "Oh, Anna, we've actually decided to do family shopping tomorrow instead of the Vatican tour," she said, dropping it quickly between sips of wine, in that light but decisive tone that people used to say no to without confrontation. "Family shopping?" I asked, hoping perhaps for an explanation, an invitation, even an excuse. But Francesca, without looking up from her glass, interjected, as always, with impeccable fluency, "It's just a tradition, my dear, you'll be bored. Why don't you take advantage of the time to check on the birthday preparations? After all, organizational matters are your area of expertise." A condescending smile, a quick glance, and that was it. The following days became a pattern of exception. I would wake to find David gone, leaving behind a hastily scrawled note about meeting my father for breakfast. Family members would disappear for hours on impromptu excursions, spontaneously organized by someone but known to everyone except me. The hotel lobby became a theater of whispers, conversations dying down as soon as I approached, smiles on faces dimming and going out like lamps during a power outage. Dinner orders changed without warning. Friends of the family would suddenly turn up in Rome, supposedly by accident, demanding new places at the table, with the result that I would end up at the edge, then at the other end, their eyes lingering on me a little too long, with that expression I knew all too well, curiosity tinged with the expectation of a fall. On the third morning, an opportunity presented itself, that crack in the facade through which one could peer and see the entire internal structure. Davide hurried out to meet his brother, forgetting to fasten the briefcase he always kept locked. Inside, I found documents, neatly folded but not hidden, drafts of a separation agreement prepared by the Mancini family's lawyer, dated 2 months earlier, proposing of mutual divorce, presented as the decision of 2 reasonable adults, with the terms of the settlement insultingly small and the whole thing reminiscent of a press release written for the society columns. But the worst part was the script. Yes, the script, the director's cut of how David was supposed to announce our breakup. At his mother's 70th birthday dinner. In front of 12 pairs of eyes. In front of the press. Under the flashes of cameras. To present it as a mature, mutually respectful decision. To frame it as a temporary separation, agreed upon to avoid rumors. My body went numb. My hands shook as I photographed each page with my phone, my fingers moving mechanically, as if documenting evidence of a crime. And it was a crime, not just against me as a wife, but as a person, as a woman who trusted. I didn't make a scene, I didn't go to him screaming, I channeled my rage into silence, into strategy, into cold, methodical documentation. Every day I found an excuse to return to the room alone, a forgotten file, an urgent call to a contractor, and I kept looking, kept digging. I found bank statements with huge transfers to offshore accounts. I found emails between David, Francesca, and a legal consultant discussing the need to liquidate assets before the media leaked the news. But the final straw was a handwritten note Francesca left in David's leather notebook, a note that was devoid of emotion but said it all. Once this unpleasantness with Anna is over, Teresa will be welcomed properly. That was it. And all the while, I didn't flinch. I met with florists, coordinated white rose and lavender arrangements, met with the restaurant manager, checked menus, confirmed seating arrangements, revised plans, everything that was needed to make the occasion run smoothly. And all the while, I was collecting crumbs. Crumbs that would soon form a map. And the Mancini family house of cards would begin to tremble. When a hotel staff member or a casual acquaintance at breakfast asked why I seemed distracted, I would gently chalk it up to final preparations for the big dinner, talking about contractor complications, last-minute cancellations, changing weather conditions, and logistical changes. But in reality, I had been gathering my arsenal the entire time, quietly, unnoticed, methodically, like a lawyer gathering evidence before a final hearing, holding back her emotions, accumulating evidence, and preparing the ground for an action that would not flash, it would explode. The morning of Francesca's birthday dawned clear and even cool for Rome in May, with a light breeze running along the boulevards, with the smell of coffee and roses, with a clear sky across which doves floated lazily, and that day I woke up before everyone else, slipped out of bed without disturbing David, and, throwing on a robe, went out onto the balcony, where the air smelled of citrus and the noise of the city that had not yet begun. The day's schedule was tight. First a private tour of the Borghese Gallery with an art historian, then lunch in a vineyard outside the city, where a spontaneous family toast was to take place, and then back to the hotel to prepare for the evening dinner, the culmination of all the preparations. As the organizer, I had to arrive at the restaurant before everyone else, check everything down to the smallest detail, and so I went down to the hotel business center to print out the last confirmations for the team. I was working hard on the final tables when I heard Francesca's voice, authoritative, sharp, penetrating the thin walls, as if deliberately raised. She was on the phone with someone on the restaurant team, and I heard, "There will be 12 seats, not 13. I don't care what the original reservation said." I sent the final table to the assistant. "Then no, it won't be a problem. The arrangement has been made with my son. His wife will not stay for dinner. It's a family matter. Do you understand? No questions asked. When she leaves." Each word hit my head like a hammer on glass, and in that second everything clicked into place. The missing seat was neither a mistake nor a last-minute change. It was part of a carefully orchestrated staging, an element of humiliation designed to make my departure seem like a personal decision, not the result of their expulsion. I closed my laptop, folded the papers neatly and walked to the elevator, my steps even, almost meditative, but inside, a new strategy was already forming. I took out my phone and started making changes, creating a new set of instructions, sending messages, canceling the old and building a new one. If the Mancini family wanted to throw a dinner to remember, I would make it happen, just not in the way they imagined it. I arrived at the Aroma restaurant, located on the roof of a 5-star hotel, an hour before everyone else. Like any good organizer, I wanted to be the first, to see, to feel, to control everything, from the temperature of the champagne to the cleanliness of the glasses. The view from the terrace was breathtaking. The Colosseum spread out before my eyes, bathed in the soft amber light of the sunset, as if the sun itself had decided to act as a decorator. I personally checked every detail: the place cards with gold calligraphy, the hand-cut floral arrangements of peonies and white roses, Francesca's favorite flowers, that I had ordered a month in advance to be ready for the evening, the 7-course tasting menu, each paired with wine from a private collection, and, finally, the 3-tiered cake, an edible masterpiece decorated with gold leaf and miniature Roman columns. "Signora Mancini will be pleased," said Marco, the maitre d', and I nodded, knowing he was wrong. This would be the last event I would organize for the Mancini family, but it would be flawless, because my professional pride demanded of me not revenge, but artistry. Back at the hotel, I put on a dark blue Valentino dress, the one I had bought especially for this evening, with a simple neckline, soft fabric that emphasized my figure with elegant severity, and applied makeup with confident, cool hands. I studied my reflection in the mirror, the face of a woman who had been through everything from idealistic dreams to cold calculation, and who stood there unbroken, but collected, like a sharpened blade. 5 years of fighting to become part of a world that had been against me from day one had left my face not tired, but resilient. The Mancinis had hoped to break me, but they had only strengthened my resolve. The family had arranged to meet in the hotel lobby to go to dinner together, to present an image of unity one last time. I arrived exactly on time, seeing them all assembled, frozen against the backdrop of velvet chairs and the soft light of the chandeliers. Francesca was as gorgeous as ever, her Chanel perfectly tailored, the diamonds catching the light like tiny camera flashes. David's eyes widened when he saw me, perhaps remembering why he fell in love, or perhaps wondering how long it would be until he was officially free. "Anna, my dear, you look lovely," Francesca said, kissing the air near my cheeks with cold politeness. "We were just waiting for the car." The ride to the restaurant was short, but full of that special chatter, filled with false gaiety and casual references to the events of the day, from which I, as always, was absent. As we rode the elevator up to the roof, to where, according to my plan, the climactic dinner was unfolding, David put his hand on the small of my back, a gesture that had once meant closeness, trust and spontaneous affection, but now seemed no more than a performance calculated for the elevator operator, whose gaze slid over us, not lingering, but fixing, as if on instructions, this symbol of pseudo-family harmony that should accompany the esteemed couple in their evening ceremony. The doors opened with a soft click, revealing the terrace I had spent weeks building, transformed from a chilly rooftop space into an elegant, almost magical, outdoor dining space, tables covered in ivory linen, candles flickering in crystal glasses, and the soft tides of live music barely audible against the sounds of Rome at night. The Colosseum, that eternal witness to rise and fall, loomed against the night sky, a reminder that no glory lasts forever, and no dynasty, no matter how bronzed it may be in history, is immune to collapse. Francesca walked in first, to the light applause of her waiting relatives, her studied smile shining like a coin plucked from the ground, artificial, shiny, but without warmth. One by one, the family moved toward the large round table, covered in a perfect white cloth, with sparkling cutlery and thin runners of greenery and white peonies flowing between them. I approached the table, the one I had planned with every detail, and immediately noticed that there were only 12 seats. I froze, looking into the empty space between Aurora and Thomas, where my cards should have been, where my chair should have been, my napkin, my place, the proof of my existence. Nothing. No trace that I had even been a part of this evening. And for a split second, I froze, feeling how, against the background of the easy conversation of the evening, in which the family with visible pleasure reminisced about past trips to Italy, conversations flowing like wine, without pauses, without attempts to acknowledge the obvious, a perfect picture of deliberate ignorance had formed around me. The staff, with whom I had confirmed the final seating arrangements only a few hours earlier, exchanged glances of confusion, but no one dared to say a word. The status of the guests and the tone in which Francesca gave instructions had done their job. "Is something wrong?" I heard her voice, feigning surprise, just loud enough for everyone to pay attention. "There seems to have been a mistake," I said calmly, with the kind of composure that had cost me countless sleepless nights. "My furnishings are missing." And at that moment the whole carefully rehearsed scene began to unfold with frightening precision. Francesca's brow furrowed slightly, Jacob cleared his throat, Aurora looked around the table, feigning mild confusion, Thomas whispered something to his wife, and finally David, my husband, The man who had once promised to stand with me against the world rose slowly from his seat, his face feigning alarm but his eyes showing no real alarm. "That's odd," Aurora murmured. "Someone must have miscalculated." Jacob quickly added, "There may have been a misunderstanding with the restaurant." And finally David spoke, with that air of feigned ease that made my skin go cold. He grinned, as those who feel absolutely safe grin, and said, "Oops, perhaps we miscalculated." The family did not laugh openly, that would have been too much of a show, but a wave of subdued mirth passed across the table, barely noticeable but unanimous, like a gentle shaking of the head in the audience at a play with a predictable ending. At that moment I saw everything with crystal clarity, not for the first time, but now finally. This was not a simple act of exclusion, it was a demonstrative, carefully staged humiliation, dressed up in the farce of a social error, played out against the backdrop of the eternal city, under the spotlights of candles and stars, chosen precisely because here I could not scream, could not explode, could not turn their masquerade into a disaster. They wanted to create a story, convenient, effective, easy to retell. Poor Anna could not stand the pressure of being part of the Mancini family. I glanced slowly around the table, noting each reaction. Francesca beaming, finally, in her opinion, back to normal. Jacob looking uncertain but loyal. Aurora and Thomas clearly enjoying themselves, their spouses a little embarrassed, but not enough to say a word. And David looking at me with an expression of cool curiosity, as if observing a rare chemical process without interfering, without sympathy, without participating. I could make a scene. I could shout the truth, demand my chair, accuse them in front of the entire staff, turn the evening upside down and give them the show they might have been waiting for. Francesca would hug David, David would shake his head, everyone would gasp in unison, and the story of the unstable wife would write itself. Instead, I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and, feeling every muscle in my face obey me with the precision of a theatrical mask, I uttered the phrase that began my return, not just to myself, but to the power that I had given over to other people's hands for so many years. "I don't think I'm part of the family." 4 words, simple but deafening, breaking their script, making their smiles freeze, knocking off their masks. David shuddered, his complacency giving way to sudden confusion, because I was not playing the role he had assigned me. "I think I'll see myself outside," I added calmly, turning away from the table, feeling behind me the gazes that were not only astonished, but also frightened. "Anna, don't be dramatic," David called after me, with that artificial alarm in his voice that sounded more like another line from a memorized script than a real emotional response, another act of his efforts to maintain the illusion of control over a situation that was sliding into an unmanageable reality that no longer obeyed their rules. "We can fix this," he continued, with an intonation that sounded like panic, covered by a facade of diplomacy, but I didn't turn around, didn't answer, didn't slow down, walked through the restaurant terrace, every table of which was decorated with my taste, my decisions, my talent, and at the same time became the arena of my expulsion, accompanied by polite applause. I nodded to the staff who had become an accidental witness to my public humiliation, maintaining an expression on my face that contained neither anger nor shame, only unwavering determination. In the elevator, I finally allowed myself to take a deep breath, then another, a slow, cleansing breath, the kind you take before you take a leap into the unknown. By the time I reached the street, my hands were no longer shaking, my back was straight, and my gait was firm, precise. A small cafe across from the restaurant, with a terrace opening directly onto the entrance to Aroma, offered the perfect vantage point, and I took a table by the wrought iron railing, ordering an espresso with a confidence that required no words. I pulled out my phone. It was time. This was my moment, 30 minutes of freedom, real freedom, no strings attached, no family looks, no excuses, and in those 30 minutes the Mancinis were probably raising their glasses and congratulating each other on the successful expulsion of an inconvenient wife, taking comfort in how cleverly it had all worked out. I opened my email and fired off a prepared letter to Marco, the manager of Aroma, a letter written in anticipation of a scenario such as this, with clear instructions for immediate execution, as is the norm in high-profile events where unforeseen circumstances require the utmost precision and speed. Attached were documents establishing my authority as the person holding the booking account and coordinating all details of the event, as well as confirmation from my bank that the expense guarantee had been revoked. The calls began, to the vineyard where the next day's lunch was to be held, cancelled. The private guide to the Vatican, cancelled. The yacht tour of the Amalfi Coast, cancelled. The villa in Tuscany where the final weekend was planned, cancelled. One by one, I revoked everything, transferring deposits from my company's line of credit back to the corporate account. With every confirmation pressed, with every advance returned, I felt the tension leave my body, my chest expand, allowing air to penetrate deeper, as if I could truly breathe for the first time in a long time. Letters from David began to arrive, first with a hint of irritation, then with shades of bewilderment, and soon with despair as the scale of what was happening dawned on him. He understood that I had not simply left the restaurant, I had walked out of their world, pulling out the power cord to which their entire beautiful illusion was connected. I did not answer a single letter. 28 minutes after leaving the Aroma Terrace, I finished my espresso, carefully placed my napkin on the saucer, paid the bill, and stood up. The final act required my presence. I smoothed out the creases in my Valentino dress, the very one that was to become a manifesto of impeccable taste and silent strength that evening, and crossed the street to the restaurant. I entered not through the main entrance, where everything was prepared for spectacular entrances, but through the service one, a narrow corridor that I had familiarized myself with in advance during one of the inspections, a habit left over from hundreds of events. Marco, who greeted me with a worried look, immediately understood why I was there. "Signora Mancini, are you sure about this?" "This is unusual," he asked carefully, trying to maintain a balance between professionalism and an understanding of the exceptional nature of the moment. "I am absolutely sure, Marco." "And I appreciate your discretion," I replied, handing over a sealed envelope. It contained the official confirmation of the cancellation of the payment, as well as the cancellation of the guarantee provided by my company for the evening. We spoke briefly, clearly, without emotion, as befits people accustomed to managing crises with grace. Now, in order to continue the dinner, the Mancini family had to provide another method of payment: no prepayment, no guarantee, no coverage of expenses. Marco nodded, keeping his cool. In the world of fine hospitality, connections were everything. I had worked with him before. He knew my credentials. He knew I wouldn't make such a request without a good reason, and he knew the risk wasn't on his side in this situation. "When should I tell them?" he asked quietly. "I'll text you in 5 minutes. I'd like to watch from a safe place." He gestured for me to follow him to the small cove at the entrance to the kitchen, the alcove, with a perfect view of Mancini's table. They were raising their glasses, Francesca in the center, her necklace glittering in the lantern light, her face alight with self-satisfaction. The first course was served, imported island caviar, ordered by Francesca herself. Their faces were alight with triumph. Dismantling this evening, this sand castle, was proving easier than I thought. In an industry where everything is based on trust, where recommendations mean more than contracts, it was the organizer who made the deposit and provided the guarantee who had the right to make changes. The digital trail of letters, contracts, payments, everything from papers to electronic signatures, belonged to me, not Francesca, not David. Their monumental confidence would collapse in a matter of minutes. My phone vibrated, displaying another message from David, short, irritated, written with a hasty aggression in which it was easy to guess the desperation carefully covered by the mask of imaginary control. "Anna, where are you? Stop behaving like a child and come back." And then, as if according to a pre-written script, another: "Mother is upset, you are embarrassing yourself." I did not answer. Instead, I opened a chat with Carmen, the manager of Villa Borza, where the family was supposed to be heading to Tuscany for the final weekend of their magnificent European tour, and briefly informed her of the cancellation. Carmen, a woman with impeccable tact, acknowledged the notification, thanked me for my professionalism and wished me well, adding that the substantial tip I had previously left for her staff would be returned to my business account in a separate transfer, with the precision I had taught them all over the years. My phone vibrated again. The messages from David were now coming in with the frequency of a queue of machines, one after another, losing their previous confidence, replacing them with panic. "The hotel just called. They said our reservation for tomorrow evening has been cancelled." "What are you doing, Anna? This is ridiculous. Call me immediately. This is not funny." Without stopping, I wrote to Marco, "You can continue." From my hidden vantage point, Tucked away in the semi-darkness of a side alcove off the kitchen, I watched the unfolding action with the precision of a theater director watching the actors on stage begin to realize that the text they had been rehearsing from no longer works. Marco, accompanied by two head waiters, moved toward Mancini's table, his gait leisurely, professionally, but with an air of urgency. He leaned toward Jacob, who sat opposite Francesca at the head of the table, and spoke quietly. At first the family paid no attention. The conversations continued, the champagne flowed, the courses followed one another, and Francesca glowed in the candlelight as if the whole evening had been a triumph of her power. But Jacob's expression changed quickly, from polite interest to puzzlement, and finally to a concern he could no longer hide. He took out his wallet and spoke to Marco, louder and more forcefully, apparently trying to resolve the matter immediately. Marco shook his head, a gesture of polite regret, and showed me on his clipboard a document listing the cancelled payments, signed with my name. By now, everyone at the table had begun to notice what was happening. Francesca put down her fork without blinking, her back straight, but there was already tension in every movement, like a predator who felt threatened. Her hand went to her throat, clutching the diamond necklace, as if seeking support. Aurora leaned toward her husband and whispered something hurriedly. Thomas pulled out his phone, his fingers frantically running across the screen. Perhaps he was trying to call one of the contractors, perhaps a legal consultant. David, unlike the others, sat completely still. His face was marbled, lifeless, but in his eyes I saw what I had known from the very beginning of the evening. He understood. He knew that I had found out about their financial affairs. He knew that I had not simply left, I had torn the covers off. He knew that if Francesca's friends, the high-born ladies of old Boston, learned that the Mancinis could no longer afford to dine at a Michelin-starred restaurant, let alone maintain that carefully constructed image, their fall would not only be painful but public. The phone in my hand vibrated, but it wasn't a text now, it was a call. David was calling. I let him hang on the line just long enough for him to feel hopeful, then I answered. "Anna," he hissed, his voice a mix of fury and panic. "What the hell are you doing?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it, and said evenly, calmly, "I guess I'm not family." He paused. "That's why I'm no longer responsible for family gatherings." His voice broke. "You have to fix this. Right now. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? For my mother? For all of us?" I listened without interrupting, then said, "Actually, David, I have an idea. This is it." His voice changed, becoming desperate, his tone shifting from commanding to pleading. "Where are you? We need to talk. I can explain everything, Teresa, everything." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I'm sure you can. The problem is, David, I've seen the financial statements. I've seen the correspondence. I know your empire is crumbling. I know you hid assets before you filed for divorce." His sharp, ragged intake of breath, not just a sound but an involuntary confession, confirmed what I already knew in every cell of my body. He had never expected me to find this out, had never even considered that I would be able to see through the glitter of the shop windows and the noble name to the rod he and his family had hidden for years beneath layers of expensive fabrics, false smiles, and carefully chosen words. He had underestimated me, as they all had, from the very first day, from the very first glance, from the very first meeting when his mother had decided that I was too independent to be convenient and too smart to be safe. But these revelations were personal to me, as personal as the text messages from Teresa about the baby she was expecting with David, as the script for their announcement of our mutual decision to divorce on a night that was supposed to be my professional triumph, as the empty seat at the table where I should have been sitting but which they had chosen to erase, as if you could erase a person from reality simply by pulling out one chair. The silence on the line was heavier than words, and in the restaurant I could see Marco now addressing the entire table, doing so with exaggerated politeness but with a clear message in his every movement. Several other diners at nearby tables turned, watching with undisguised interest as the grand stage became a public spectacle, as the humiliation they had intended for me returned to them, unfolding with mathematical precision. This was the kind of disgrace they had expected from me, trembling lips, tears, a broken back, and now it was theirs. "Anna, please," David's voice had lost its aristocratic confidence, leaving only a broken plea. You don't understand what this will do to us. I understand perfectly, David. That's why I did it, I said, feeling each word imprinted in the space between us like a brand. We can solve this. Come back to the hotel. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. He was no longer coaxing, he was clinging, desperately, almost pathetically. No, David, I don't think we can solve this problem. I ended the call, tapping the screen as if closing a door. It was time for my last appearance. As I emerged from my hiding place and headed for the table, 12 pairs of eyes turned to me at once, like a slow-motion shot, with every emotion written in close-up: anger, fear, disbelief. Francesca spoke first, her voice, usually silky and controlled, now shaking with rage. "How dare you ruin my birthday?" she almost hissed, and I smiled without missing a beat, and in that smile there was no triumph, but a strange, even calm. "I learned from the best, Francesca. After all, isn't this what you planned for me? Public humiliation. A planned exit. The only difference is that I rewrote the ending." Jacob jumped to his feet, his face flushing. "This is outrageous. You had no right." "I had every right," I replied, looking at him with dignity. "Every contract. Every booking. Every agreement was in my name or in the name of my company. I simply adjusted the plans." "You'll regret this," Aurora hissed. "When David divorces you, you get nothing." "That's where you're wrong," I said, turning slowly to David. "I have copies of everything. Offshore accounts. Hidden assets. Fraudulent business deals. I'm sure Iris will find them absolutely fascinating." The faces around the table began to pale, as if the blood had drained from them, turning the Mancinis into ghostly silhouettes. And it was in that moment, as their facade began to crumble in the torchlight and the gaze of bystanders, that the real meaning of what was happening hit me. I felt no triumph, no pride, no rage even, just a deep, cleansing sense of release, as if a chain that had held me down for so many years had finally fallen. I turned and walked away, slowly, without looking back, knowing that this was the last time I would see them as my family. I left Italy the next morning, upgrading my ticket to first class on a direct flight to Boston, using the same frequent flyer miles I had once accumulated planning their immaculate, perfect vacations. The irony was not lost on me. I left behind a family in crisis. Their carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time, not metaphorically, but literally. Through the hotel concierge, I learned that the dinner had been paid for after all, using as collateral an antique Bulgari bracelet taken from Francesca's wrist with that pained expression she'd hoped never to show. A bank transfer had been promised that morning, but word had already begun to spread through Rome's closed network of high-end hospitality that the illustrious American family were having trouble paying. The remaining suppliers I hadn't cancelled in person had begun to demand payment in advance rather than rely on promises. My phone was flooded with messages, some outright threats, others pleading. I read them while laying over in London, sipping hot Earl Grey in the British Airways lounge. From Jacob, "This requires legal action. Our lawyers will be in touch." From Aurora, "You have made the biggest mistake of your life." From Thomas, "Did you really think you could humiliate our family without consequences?" But it was Francesca's message that was most telling. "I always knew you were a normal person." This vindictive display only confirmed what I had been saying all along. And yet it was David's messages that revealed the true picture, not just of collapse, but of chaos within a family that had lost control. "You have no idea what you've done. My father had a mild heart attack. Is that what you wanted?" Then another, Donati and Giuliani saw everything. "You know what this means for our situation," was David's final message, his desperate torrent of words becoming increasingly slurred, losing its usual rigor and stylistic precision, revealing beneath the surface the emotions he had spent his life hiding behind the facade of a well-mannered air. Later, a notice arrived from the hotel, stating that they were demanding payment for the entire week's stay in advance, as all financial guarantees had been cancelled and their line of credit was no longer active. The bank guarantor previously linked to my company had been formally withdrawn. And finally, in a final, almost pleading letter, David wrote, "Please, Anna, I need to talk to you. This is about more than us." This is about the whole family. But I didn't respond to any of these messages. Instead, I opened a secure cloud drive and forwarded the financial documents I had collected to my lawyer. Everything from correspondence and bank statements to scans of contracts, all neatly organized, as I was accustomed to doing with client files. In the accompanying note, I specified that all of this was to be kept completely confidential and be prepared for immediate use in the event that the Mancini family took legal action. If they wanted to sue, let them. I would be ready. When I returned to Boston and walked into our Beacon Hill home, that luxurious townhouse where every room was evidence of compromise, every wall knew my concessions, I no longer felt either attachment or longing. I hired a professional moving and packing company, specifying that they pack only those things that I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were mine: the clothes and jewelry I had acquired long before our marriage, my collection of first edition books, the paintings and sculptures I had bought in New York when I was still living in a tiny apartment overlooking a brick wall. Everything else, from wedding gifts to furniture we had bought together, I left untouched. I did not want to take with me the slightest trace of the artfully woven web of deception and manipulation into which I had been lured under the guise of love. 2 days later, a modest but telling story appeared in the Boston Globe's gossip section, headlined, "Investment Group Faces Investigation." It was careful to mention financial irregularities, mixed reports, and investor anxiety. Although the story didn't make the front page, and it didn't mention Mancini directly, among those who should have known, it did. The talk began in Boston's elite clubs and private rooms, and ripples of mistrust began to ripple across the waters of an impeccable reputation. A week after I returned from Rome, David showed up at my new apartment unannounced. He looked different, not just tired but washed out, as if the veneer polished by years of privilege had finally worn away, revealing a tired, frightened man underneath. "You need to come home," he said as soon as I opened the door. "This has gone too far. This is no longer a negotiating tactic, Anna. This is a disaster." He walked in uninvited, as if out of habit, ran a hand through his tousled hair, and exhaled. "The Securities and Exchange Commission is looking into my father's accounts. 2 board members have resigned. My mother canceled a charity event. 3 major donors pulled out." I kept my cool and replied, "That sounds like a Mancini family problem." "But it's not my problem, David. It's yours. It's yours, too. If I go down with the ship, we're still married, my debts will be yours," he pressed again. I allowed myself a small, calm smile. "Not when I have proof that you intentionally excluded me from financial decisions and hid assets with the intent to defraud me in the divorce. My attorney assures me that's enough to protect me from any liability." And that's when his facade, so carefully constructed over the years, finally cracked. David sat down on the couch, covered his face with his hands, hunched over like a man who had nowhere else to run. "I never wanted things to be like this." "What did you want, David?" I asked, letting my voice remain soft, but there was a hint of steel in it. "Did you want me to marry you for love and stay for my event planning skills? To keep your social calendar in order while you reunited with Teresa? To keep quiet when you no longer needed me?" He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen for a long time: confusion. "It wasn't like this in the beginning," he whispered. "I loved you. But not enough to stand up to your family. Not enough to be honest with me about your affair with Teresa," I answered, and it wasn't an accusation, but a statement. I sat down across from him, feeling not anger but a strange, transparent calm growing inside me. "When's the baby coming?" I asked. His head snapped up. "How are you? 4 months, from the texts I've seen," I interrupted. "Congratulations." Silence fell between us, thick as the rain that had begun to pound the windows of my new apartment, an apartment smaller than our home on Beacon Hill, but paid for entirely with money from my business, built without the Mancini family's money or connections. "I'll give you whatever you want," he finally said. "Just hand over the papers. Sign them. Name your price." And that was the moment I finally understood, despite everything that had happened, the Mancinis, and David, still didn't understand who I was. After 5 years of marriage, they still saw a woman who could be bought, valued, coaxed, manipulated, whose motives, they thought, must be the same as theirs, Money, status, power. I don't want your money, David, I said, feeling each letter of the words take root inside me with a finality that no longer required confirmation, sought approval, or needed dramatic accompaniment. I want my freedom. I want the truth to be acknowledged, and with that I stood up, making it clear that our conversation was over, that there would be no more reprises or repetitions of this scene, because I was no longer an actress in their play. The papers are with my lawyer, I continued, unless you try to drag me down with you again. The terms of the divorce were simple, like all things brilliant in their directness. I leave with what is mine, you with what is yours, and Teresa with the child. His voice, when he tried to say something, was barely audible, like a shadow that has lost its source of light. It is between you and your conscience, I added, looking at him with regret, but without pity. I hope you will be a better husband to her than you were to me. After he left, I stood for a long time at the window, watching the rain intensify, the drops, one after another, breaking against the glass, as if the air itself were trying to cleanse the city of lies, of vanity, of family facades built of glass and steel, but on closer inspection, fragile as porcelain. The scandal unfolded not with an explosion but with a stubborn, inexorable creep. The Boston Globe published a more detailed story about the financial machinations of the Caldwell Investment Group, with which the Mancinis had been associated for decades, and it began an avalanche of exodus, as longtime clients began to silently but decisively withdraw their funds, defying explanation and entreaty. Francesca, whose power had been built on a network of charities, suddenly found herself an honorary member of 3 boards, stripped of influence, ironically silenced by the weight of public opinion. Teresa's pregnancy became public knowledge when she was spotted leaving the office of one of Boston's most prominent obstetricians, the engagement ring on her finger leaving no doubt about her status change. But the devastating detail was in the details. The timeline of events made it clear that her relationship with David had resumed long before the official breakdown of my marriage. In a circle where betrayal was tolerated as long as it was kept secret, this act was not just a moral failure, it violated an unspoken code of conduct. My business, meanwhile, not only survived, it thrived. Paradoxically, it was the scandal that made me interesting, persuasive, and trustworthy. Those who had previously greeted me with reserve at social events now squeezed my hand with respect at meetings. The story that spread around town was not about a wife rejected and humiliated, but about a professional who refused to allow herself to be destroyed and did not accept the role of a victim. 6 months later, I received a letter that made me laugh out loud. It was an official request for a tender to plan Francesca Mancini's next charity event. Apparently, desperation had finally overcome pride. I politely declined, citing my workload and the impossibility of adding a new project to my already busy schedule. The divorce was finalized without drama or court. It's amazing how quickly things can be resolved when the other side suddenly loses all their cards. The Mancinis were focused on saving their reputation and finances, and so they agreed to my terms without argument, without false smiles. David and Teresa married quietly, without fanfare, without press photos. Their daughter was born 2 weeks after the marriage was registered. I sent no gift. There was no card, no flower, no message. And so, a year after that night in Rome, I found myself back in Italy, this time not as a wife, not as a daughter-in-law, not as someone who had to earn her place at the table, but as the one who chose which table to sit at. I was planning a lavish celebrity wedding on the Amalfi Coast, with flowers delivered by boat and the menu planned by chefs with names in Paris, Tokyo, and San Francisco. Standing on the terrace, the sea breeze carrying the scent of jasmine and salt, my phone in one hand, my tablet with my schedule in the other, I suddenly realized that I was happy, not despite the failure of my marriage, but because of it. The Mancinis had tried to make me a nobody, to make me feel superfluous, excluded, instrumental. But in their arrogance, they had underestimated the main thing. They had not destroyed me, they had liberated me. And thanks to that, I was able to reclaim my story. A story not about defeat, but about choice. A story not about the desire to be accepted, but about the courage to reject a life built on external gloss. I raised a glass to the setting sun, a toast, not to victory, but to understanding. To that missing chair that once showed me exactly where I should be. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and put a like. See you soon.